well, this is going to be an interesting book to talk about. This is a book called Hitler's American Friends, The Third Reich Supporters in the United States by Bradley W. Hart. This is about, during World War II, actually before World War II, the sort of fascist movement that was happening in the United States and different German pro-Hitler stuff that was going on in different areas. It was very strange. It was kind of niche, but very, very odd. A lot of things that were happening. The biggest one was the Bund. It was a group of, I don't want to say a German club, but it was one of these things that was working to actively support Germany at the time and their government, which was sort of fluctuating into Hitler at that point. It was very odd. It was this weird kind of social club. A lot of these groups were sort of run by grifters, basically. I don't know what else to call them other than these were men trying to do power grabs or cash in or whatever else. And they were trying to do it either politically or monetarily in different ways, at least in some of these groups like the Bund and the Silver Legion. These were sort of, they weren't as fringe as we've been led to believe. I believe that's the main point of this book, is those groups were not as fringe as we have been led to believe in history classes. We have this big thought a lot of the times that before World War II and when everything was going on, we were unequivocally, as a whole, 100% in the country against Hitler and everything that was going on, even before we got into the war. That is not true. That is demonstratively not true. And this book goes into a great deal about that. It even talks about some of the big colleges where there was a lot of anti-Semitism going on and different things happening, that they were trying to make sure that they were sending kids, up until the war, they were sending college students that were in German club or whatever else, were sending them on trips to Germany. And this is not just when it was fun cabaret Germany. That's when it started. But this is when we were talking like Hitler Youth Germany was happening, and they were still sending these students over there. A lot of these students already had leanings that way. You're basically sending them to get even more indoctrinated and trained. That was one thing he goes into here when he's talking about some of these colleges and the fact that some of these professors and different things supported some stuff that you were just kind of aghast that would go on in the United States. The groups that he talks about, the Bund and the Silver Legion and things like that, those weren't as big. They were not major movements, but they were enough that they were noted movements. They were enough that even different groups like Democrats and Republicans would join together to try to keep them out of power in different political runs and things, because they recognized that A, this group was fascist, and B, if we don't do something to stop it, it will snowball into something else. And there was an element of violence to it as well. There was there was protests of these different things. They weren't being just happening and no one saying anything, but there was a lot of, it's the same thing that's always tied to fascism. It's violent. And that was something that was happening even at this point. But history book wise, we tend to just ignore the fact that was going on, because we World War II as such a black and white situation, we were definitely on the side of good situation, that we often ignore the fact that it's really easy to slide into these things. And it's really easy to let this stuff happen in your country and just kind of write it off or not pay attention to it or go along with it and not realize the damage that it could do. Some of these groups did do minor damage in different ways. One of the big ones, and the one that may have been heard out of all of this, was the America First movement, which has a very interesting name. The America First movement was a little more noted because one of the big people that was involved in it was Charles Lindbergh. Charles Lindbergh had quite the affinity for Nazi ideology, and I've seen people try to do apologetics for him and whatever else. I find it hard to really sit down and write off what he did. He was a major figure. You're talking about somebody who is a major celebrity at this time, basically sitting there and saying, "Wait, guys, but Germany has some good ideas." There's not a place for that, and there's not really a place for me to excuse somebody's behavior like that either. And he was a kind of major figure in the America First kind of political movement, which was a political movement, but it was a social movement as well. He spent a lot of time trying to, I don't want to say peacekeep, but at least sort of negotiate between the United States and Hitler while things weren't Pearl Harbor level of military involvement. And I feel like he did a lot of harm. He literally, whatever argument you make, you have to acknowledge that he had to be anti-Semitic to be involved with what he was involved in. He knew some of the stuff that was going on. There's another person that I cannot stand and despise, and the more I read stuff about this, the more I despise, and that's Henry Ford, who was a blatant anti-Semite and blatantly was basically trying to help Germany and different things in different ways when it came to that. And I keep saying Germany, which makes me sound like I am going after the country of Germany. I'm not. I'm just saying that because YouTube, I don't know exactly what we'll do if I say other things that are on here, and I don't want them to like do some weird thing with my video or whatever else. But we know specifically what we're talking about when I'm saying Germany in the 1930s. We know what I'm saying. There is another very interesting part in here where he talks about, well, two interesting parts that I found kind of fascinating. One where he talks about businessmen who made money during World War II in Germany, who were in the United States, some of those being Coca-Cola and GM, who basically kind of lined their pockets with German money, because the Germans were really into Coca-Cola at that time, and they had factories and things over there, and this was something that they, up until they were not allowed to, kept doing over there, which is interesting. You also have, they talk about the religious right in here, and that is somebody who I used to have to teach about. That was Coughlin, Father Charles E. Coughlin, who, oh Lord, he was a Catholic priest, but the bigger thing about him is he was a radio celebrity. He was imagine bigger than Rush Limbaugh, Tucker Carlson. He was a right pundit. He was more a radio celebrity than he was anything else. He got enough money crowdfunded, basically. He's one of the first people who did this, crowdfunded into him, that he was able to, because NBC, I believe it was NBC, was the one that was the radio station that said, no, you cannot be on us anymore because you are saying stuff that's awful. You are saying anti-Semitic stuff, and we don't want that on our station. Well, he said, fine, I'll make my own station. And he was able to crowdsource making his own radio station, that we are talking that his, by volume of people based on population, his audience was way bigger than, say, Rush Limbaugh or anything like that. People were tuning in to this guy. I've heard audio recordings of him speaking. He is very charismatic. I will give him that. Like, when you're listening to him, he has a good sound to him. But he is absolutely vile in what he's saying about things. And he did, but he would get right up to the border of saying things that you were like absolutely going to tar and feather a person for, but wouldn't quite jump over. And that's kind of how he made his path to fame there. And Coughlin's just weird, and not weird. He is a prologue to what we have now in a lot of very right-wing pundits saying very hateful things, and being allowed to, and not encoding their language in a certain way that you can't quite, well, I didn't say that, but you did, kind of. And he's kind of the forerunner of that. I had to talk about him in U.S. history. He's part of the SPIs in Tennessee history. At least his name is mentioned in the SPIs of Tennessee history and in the books and whatever. Well, in the history book. I don't think he's specifically in the SPI of that time period, but he is mentioned a lot of times. He was mentioned alongside of Huey Long, and that was during the Great Depression. People were willing to listen to these people because people were unhappy. They were desperate. And Coughlin was giving them somebody to blame a lot of times. Long sort of tied a lot of his stuff into that chicken in every pot type philosophy that he was going to fix this situation. And both of them were anti-Roosevelt. I don't necessarily think Roosevelt is a saint by any means, but I do think these two people, particularly Coughlin, was kind of horrendous. Really, really awful. But Coughlin is one that does not I don't feel like gets talked about as much as some of the other kind of right-wing people, fascist kind of right-wing things that were going on at that time. And again, keep in mind, this is when all the fascist movement is happening in Europe and Germany and all that other sort of stuff. And people are saying this is dangerous, this is bad, but it is also still happening in the United States. And I think the most terrifying thing about Coughlin was the reach of his audience. He had a huge, huge audience, and he is the precursor of people like Alex Jones and InfoWars and all those different sorts of things that are able to like grift, I guess, and crowdsource and get people to buy their things and sort of make a big business out of being this type of person. It's very interesting to see the genesis of this, and I would say Coughlin is, because I don't think there was ever, I don't remember, I have not seen anyone do this before, but he was there basically crowdsourcing his own stuff, his own radio stations. I believe his church was called the Little Flower. It was something Church of the Little Flower or something like that. So he would have these like flower donations that you would send in and like help me keep going on spreading the truth and da da da. And it's very interesting wording and an interesting style that you still see now if you keep an eye out into different groups that try to fund themselves both off the extreme right and the extreme left. And it's kind of weird seeing it in a 1930s concept. But this book is very, very well researched, very, very informative about a subject that I don't hear talked about much. This book was another one that Behind the Bastards, the podcast, I get a lot of my reading from them now. This one was one that he talked about during his talking about the Bund and different things like that. He has an episode where he was talking about, or 2 episodes I think, where he was talking about fascism before in the United States before World War II. And he brings up this as one of the books that he got a lot of his information from. It's very, very interesting. Very, very reprehensible behavior from some people. Very interesting behavior that you can see copied more recently in different things as well. And just bizarre. Bizarre in a kind of scary way, but also bizarre in a way that I think people need to know about some of this. And back when I was classroom U.S. history, I teach Tennessee history now, but back when I was classroom U.S. history, I think I would have talked about Coughlin a little more and a little bit of a less of a precursor. I think, then there was this priest who was real popular online. I think I would have explained him a little bit differently had I known more in depth about him and what he was actually doing at that time, which is horrifying. And I'm glad he lost popularity and sort of faded away at some point here, because wow, that was a thing, and the amount of money he was bringing in was also wild.